more systems. Yes, but actually I love talking about the human body, so I think it's great that we're talking about all the systems. So take a good look at these pictures, because in the next 2 mini lessons you will know what each of these things are and what they do. So the more systems that we're going to talk about, the other systems are the lymphatic system, the immune system, and the digestive system. Now the lymphatic system and the immune system kind of go hand in hand. So I'm going to break this up into kind of 2 different parts, 2 different sections. So we'll talk about the lymphatic and the immune system first. So starting off with the lymphatic system. So people don't often know what the system really is. They're like, lymphatic system? Yeah, sure. So the cool thing is this plays a huge role in kind of our immunity. But as you, and I'm not going to ask you guys, I want you to kind of think about if you've heard of anything, but most of you guys have not heard it. But here are some of the things that it does do. It protects the body through the immune response, which I'll go through in a little bit. Transports fluid from the interstitial spaces to the bloodstream, helps distribute hormones, nutrients, and waste. Okay, so if you notice here, here's the lymphatic system. Kind of looks like the circulatory system, right? You have all these little vessels. Well, these are called lymph vessels. And then you have these little kind of balls that you'll see a little bit closer. Those are called lymph nodes. And it's really interesting what this actually does, that basically any of the waste kind of materials from the blood, any kind of extra fluids, sometimes infections, basically can diffuse out of those capillaries, those really tiny little blood vessels, into the interstitial spaces, which are kind of the spaces in between, but then can kind of diffuse into the lymph system, okay? And they will transport this lymph, which is a liquid, through the lymph system, and as it meets these tiny little kind of buds, you'll see they look a little bit like a kidney, but these lymph nodes filter out some of those things. So I don't want to talk too much more before I get into some of our pictures, but here are some of the organs of the lymphatic system. Your tonsils, your thymus, your spleen, all of the lymph nodes, which tend to be, if you see this picture, the lymph nodes tend to be very heavily popular kind of in certain areas, in the armpits, okay, in the groin region. Those are the places where you see a lot of lymph nodes, okay? So those are the organs, and I'll talk a little bit about each one and what they do. So the spleen, right here in lovely pink, here's an actual spleen. The spleen is located kind of right below the stomach, and it removes abnormal blood cells and other blood components. So your blood cells, red blood cells, they pretty much die off every 30 days. Red blood cells are very unique. They do not have any nucleus, and so therefore they don't survive that long. So they're constantly being kind of replenished, remade, recycled. So the spleen takes care of that. They actually kind of recycle some of these old red blood cells and other blood components. Also, the spleen is a storage for iron recycled from old red blood cells, which is very important. And another thing about the spleen is it's one of the initiators of the immune response, okay? So that's something kind of important to know, that it does have a lot to do with the immune response, that if there's any kind of infection, the spleen can kind of act on that, okay? Now the tonsils are something interesting. Way back in the day, so your parents are a little bit younger than my parents, but when my parents were young, doctors really didn't know what tonsils were. They didn't know exactly what they did. But tonsils are actually lymph nodules. They're like lymph nodes, but a little bit larger, okay? Again, remember, you have a lot of lymph nodes that are located in this neck region, so when you go to the doctors and they start feeling around here, they're actually feeling, number one, your tonsils, but which are the same things as lymph nodes. So they can feel that if you're not feeling good and some of them are enlarged, well, typically your lymph nodes are trying to fight off infections. So infections kind of are housed in those lymph nodes. Well, back in the day, doctors didn't know what lymph nodes or what these tonsils did in particular. And every time someone got sick, they're like, oh, man, their lymph node or these tonsils are getting huge. What are they doing? And they would take them out. So my mom had her tonsils out. My dad had her tonsils out. But really, what they realized later is that tonsils and lymph nodes in general are there to help fight infection. Now there are a lot of people that have chronic tonsillitis. So this is an example of tonsillitis where your tonsils are very inflamed and there's infections that basically is constantly happening. Those people might need to have their tonsils out. So they still remove people's tonsils for sure if there are constantly having, issues. But they're realizing that in a general sense, tonsils help people fight infections, okay? So most people have 5 tonsils. You have usually 2 up here, 2 down here, and kind of 1 back in the back. But those do help fight infections. Okay, so the thymus right here is located just posterior to the sternum. It produces hormones that are important to the development and maintenance of normal immune defenses. Okay, so basically, I'll get into some of the certain cells that are responsible in the immune response, but this is where the T cells, we call these lymphocytes, mature. And those lymphocytes play a huge role, so we'll talk about that in a bit, but just think about that. The thymus is where those lymphocytes mature, so it's obviously a very important organ when it comes to the immune response. Okay? Now, like I said, similar to the circulatory system, your lymph system kind of runs parallel to all of your blood vessels. So in green here is the lymphatic system, the lymph vessels, and they kind of run throughout wherever those blood vessels are, because remember, it gathers waste and materials that come out of the bloodstream and are kind of waiting in those interstitial spaces, and takes it away and can actually break it down. In these lymph nodes, you have that lymph fluid that comes through it, and in that lymph node there's a lot of different defense mechanisms that start to break down infections. Okay, but one thing that I want to bring up is the whole thing about cancer. So typically cancer can be in one particular area. Say it starts off as cancer of the pancreas or something, and basically you have this overproduction of cells, which is typically what forms a tumor, and you have these cancer cells. But remember, what happens is sometimes that those cancerous cells can get in the lymph system, and basically think about the lymph system. It runs very much parallel to the circulatory system. So basically it can circulate throughout the whole body when it gets into the lymph system. So that's why when they find cancer beyond where it started off, if they find it in the lymphatic system, it's typically not a good thing, because that means it's already circulated throughout your body and it's kind of spreading that cancer to different parts of your body. So that's something to understand, that a lot of times women with breast cancer, they will get a lymph node removed, and if they find cancerous cells in those lymph nodes, they can kind of tell what stage that cancer is in just from that. So just a little FYI. So walls of the lymphatic vessels are thin and contain valves. Lymph nodes resemble kidneys, okay? So they kind of look like a kidney shaped, and they filter the lymph for foreign particles, and ultimately they'll start to destroy some of those foreign particles and fight off that infection, okay? So the lymph system is obviously key. So here's what a lymph node looks like. Again, when we get to the excretory system, where we talk about the kidney a little bit more, you'll notice a lot of similarities. It looks very similar to this lymph node. So these are areas of concentrated lymphocytes and macrophages, along with lymphatic veins. So these, basically, when you see these little purple and blue things, it says densely packed B and T cells and macrophages and plasma cells. So these are like all of these white blood cells that can just go, like attack, whatever is foreign in there. That was kind of scary, right? Yeah. Anyways, that's what those concentrated lymphocytes and macrophages are doing, is they're trying to fight off whatever infection or something foreign that's in there, okay? And obviously you have all these lymph vessels where the lymph flows in here, and all that good stuff, okay? So that's what a lymph node looks like. So I've been mentioning lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are one type of white blood cell that aid in the immune response. Now remember, when we talked about blood, in your blood you have lots of different components. You have white blood cells, which are all of these 5 up here. You have monocytes, lymphocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. These are all different types of white blood cells. They all do kind of very specific things. And macrophages, sorry, that's part of the white blood cells as well. All of these do different things, but for the most part, they are part of the immune response. When something is not right, when homeostasis is kind of knocked out of balance, all these different cells have different kind of jobs or roles in order to get your body back in homeostasis. Obviously, the erythrocytes, which are your red blood cells, and your platelets are also part of blood, but these lymphocytes right here are very important. Again, they mature in the thymus, they're found in those lymph nodes. They're really good at fighting off foreign things. So here's some disorders of the lymphatic system. There are many, as when anything goes wrong with any system, there are always these consequences. So one thing is lymphedema, okay? Anytime you see edema, that means swelling, okay? So lymphedema, accumulation of fluid within the tissue due to inadequate lymphatic drainage. So obviously you can see some pretty gross graphic pictures that basically there is some major swelling, okay? So this lymph fluid cannot drain properly, and so therefore obviously it's causing these massive amounts of swelling. It can be caused by surgeries, bacterial infections, and parasites. So parasites, if you guys have heard of elephantiasis, is due to a parasite that basically causes this inadequacy of the lymph drainage. So even though it's still a type of lymphedema, it's actually caused by a parasite. And this is a picture of someone with elephantiasis, where they have these just very abnormal looking appendages and such due to all of this swelling. The lymphatic system also, what am I saying? Going back to tonsillitis, this is a picture of enlarged tonsils. Again, anytime you hear the suffix itis, that's inflammation of, so tonsillitis is inflammation of the tonsils. So obviously the lymph nodes can be invaded by pathogens and cause localized infections. Again, if you have chronic tonsillitis, sometimes the doctors will say, okay, let's take those out. Splenomegaly, okay? This is where you have an enlarged spleen due to different infections, but primarily mononucleosis. So if you've ever had mono, you have this infection of those monocytes, okay? And what happens is then your spleen basically is infected itself, and it becomes enlarged. And that's why with mono, you're not supposed to be very active, because you could rupture your spleen. You have to, really let yourself heal from this and let your spleen kind of go back to its normal size. Otherwise, you can really harm yourself with that. And, mono is something that obviously makes you very tired, and it's affecting your immune system, and it's kind of a lengthy infection. You have to, undergo anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks of just kind of chilling out, which is kind of a bummer. So more on immunity. The human immune system relies on 3 levels of defense, which is nice. Not just one, we have 3. The first one is physical and chemical barriers, so I'll go over that. And the second one is non-specific defense mechanisms, and the third one, specific defense mechanisms. With modern technology, we now have an additional line of defense. So antibiotics, antiviral drugs, and so forth end up being kind of our third line of defense, which is great. So 2 of them happen naturally in our bodies, okay? So let's, I gotta bring up my lovely video. Actually, I will show you guys that clip because I don't have that pulled up for some odd reason. It's because I'm trying to record this so late. So I love Survivor, and of course you have the immunity challenges. So watch, you can pause this right now, click on my link and watch that quick little clip on the Survivor, because it's always nice to see what this means kind of in relative terms when we talk about what immunity means, okay? So kind of a fun way. If you guys ever got into Survivor, you'll like this immunity challenge. So watch that link, pause me right now. Okay, so maybe you're back now. All right, more on each line of defense. So the first defense, chemical and physical barriers. Obviously, block the entry and spread of disease-causing agents is due to these chemical and physical barriers. A physical barrier is our skin. Our skin is so important, that integumentary system, and that creates this huge barrier from some of the junk that's out in the environment to our internal bodies that are, so perfectly balanced. So that's a physical barrier. You also have chemical barriers. You have, things that you put on your skin, different things like that, washing your hands. Anytime you're killing off any kind of things, you're kind of putting up a chemical barrier, okay? Also, different things that we secrete, sometimes just our oils and the sweat different things that we secrete through our skin creates kind of a chemical barrier that is, not, I mean, can you imagine if we secreted things that bugs just loved and like we had bugs just like living on us? No. So thank goodness we don't, because that's kind of a chemical barrier due to the things that we excrete out of our pores, okay? Now, the non-specific responses. So this is the second line of defense. So this includes swelling and inflammation, and I'm going to go through this diagram in just a second. The pain associated with inflammation lets the brain know that there's been a breach of the first line of defense. So remember, our skin is typically our first line of defense, but if something gets through that, that pain is necessary because it sends a signal up to the brain saying, hello, we need to do something a little bit more here. So the 4 signs of inflammation are redness, warmth, swelling, and pain. So right here, this is showing, I think, a splinter. Okay, so basically this splinter gets stuck into the skin, okay, and all of a sudden that pain sends a signal to the brain, and you have this influx of fluid, okay, and that fluid is typically kind of like a lymph fluid that has lots of macrophages and lymphocytes that basically are trying to kill off some of the bacteria that could be on this liver or whatever, and different things are released, histamine, all of these things, but the inflammatory response is very important, okay? So reading up here, these words are really tiny, but if you can read with me, the inflammatory response is a body's second line of defense against invasion of the pathogens. Why is this important, or why it is important that clotting, now I can't even read, the clotting factors from the circulatory system have access to the injured area. So why is that important? Because ultimately, and I don't need to answer that because that's not totally what I'm talking about, the clotting factors, but it is important, obviously, to stop, bleeding and so forth, so the clotting, that stops that. But most importantly, you're going to have swelling, redness, warmth, and pain anytime your body's trying to fight off something, especially near the surface of your skin, okay? Even when you sprain an ankle or something, you're going to see that major inflammation and swelling because your body's trying to heal that area, okay? So that's the second line of defense, okay? It includes this is the third line of defense. Includes the antibody-mediated and cell-mediated responses, aka the immune system, okay? These specific defense are part of the body's response to the disease-causing agents. So the bacteria, fungi that tries to invade us, the immune system is like, I'm not letting you in, okay? So immunity results from the production of protein antibodies specific to a given antigen. Now let me kind of make sure you guys understand that. An antigen can be any molecule that causes the body to make antibodies. So antibodies are fighting off things. So take, for instance, you had the flu, okay? Your body is trying to produce antibodies to fight off those foreign particles, which are kind of known as the antigens. So basically, after you have fully recovered, your body has those antibodies that have already been made. So basically, what if you were to get past those same germs? Your body, you probably won't get the same flu virus because your body has already basically produced antibodies to fight that off. So, that's the sad thing is there's so many different strains of so many different things like the flu virus that to me, the flu shot is really only, targeting one type of flu virus. So anyways, that's what's happening with the immunity is the production of protein antibodies specific to a given antigen. So your body is trying to protect itself by building up these antibodies to fight off all these foreign, I'm like karate chopping, these foreign antigens, okay? Antigens are located on the surface of an invader, okay? So say, for instance, you have this bacteria. You have these antigens that are on the surface of that bacteria kind of as markers. They kind of like tell, hey, I am this. And that's what an antigen is, okay? So the antibodies bind to the antigens and they kill or inactivate them in many different ways, okay? So B cells produce antibodies where T cells are involved in the immune response. So there's different types of cells. Again, remember all those different white blood cells? You have your B cells that are producing antibodies only. Your T cells are really more involved in just the immune response and that swelling and inflammation and so forth, okay? And then you have your macrophages. White blood cells that continually patrol the body in search of foreign antigenic molecules, viruses, or microbes. So basically, they're kind of like all over the place saying, I'm going to get you if you come near me. So they're just patrolling. You have helper T cells, which are basically the macrophages that become activated when they encounter some kind of foreign thing like an antigen. And you have B cells. B cells divide, forming plasma cells and B memory cells. And I'm not going to go too much into those. Please read through a little bit in your lesson. You'll see a little bit more on these, but I want to kind of give you the gist of the immune response. And then you have antibodies. The presence of an antigen in the body stimulates antibody production. Okay, so that's a little bit more on macrophages. Now I want to tell you guys real quick about blood types and transplants, because that has to do with antibodies and antigens as well, and kind of the immune response. So we all are a particular blood type, okay? And what that blood type means, when you're A, type A blood, that means you have these A antigens. Remember, antigens are markers to kind of say, hey, I'm this kind of cell, I'm this kind of cell. So if you're type A blood, you have A markers, or A antigens. If you're type B blood, you have B antigens. If you're AB, you have both of these types of antigens. So you're going to have a cell that looks like this. If you're type O, like me, you have no antigens, okay? So then look at this diagram here, because it talks about if you were to get a blood transfusion, okay, where basically you're type A blood, okay, you can only receive either type A blood or O blood, because what's going to happen is if you were to give somebody with type A blood this type B blood, they have these foreign antigens, and the type A blood will all of a sudden start to make these antibodies. Actually, the antibodies are already found in there, which are right here. These are the plasma antibodies that will basically fight off this red blood cell and cause it to clot, and you could actually die, okay? If you were to give a type A person AB blood, again, they still have those B antigens on there, so it's going to be attacked by the antibodies, okay? So basically, you cannot give type A blood anything but A blood and O blood, because there's no antigens, okay? With look at type B blood, you cannot give type B blood A blood because there's A antigens. You can't give them type AB. So again, type B blood can only get B and O. Otherwise, it's going to fight it off and cause it to clot. Okay, AB blood has both of these. So AB blood has no antibodies, because basically it couldn't have A or B antibodies, otherwise it would be fighting off its own cells, right? So type AB blood can get A blood, B blood, AB blood, and O. So we call AB blood the universal recipient. AB blood can get any kind of blood. So if you go into the hospital and they find out you're AB blood, they can give you any blood, you're good. Okay, so your transfusion is pretty easy. Now, type O blood, okay, no antigens. Look what kind of antibodies are floating around the plasma. Okay, you have both A and B antibodies. So can you give type O blood A blood? B blood? AB blood? No. Type O blood can only receive O blood, okay? Type O blood is known as the universal donor, because type O blood can give to A, can give to B, and can give to AB. But the great thing is type O blood is the most common, okay? So some of you guys might be like, oh man, I'm type O and I can only get O blood. Well, what if I need a transfusion and I'm going to die and blah, blah, blah. Well, great thing is most of the population is type O, okay? So anyways, that's a little bit about antibodies and antigens. All right, so here's what happens if you, again, if you guys want to pause this and look at this a little bit closer, but if you have type A blood, you're going to have the antibodies that basically are going to cause the clotting, and this is what it looks like. It kind of clots up, and can you imagine what that would look like in your own body if all your blood just clotted up? You could actually die from that. So it's just showing what would happen if you basically combined the wrong bloods, bad transfusion. Okay, here's some disorders, and then we're gonna near the end. So basically you have allergies. Allergies are obviously another immune response that if your body cannot take, and doesn't process some of the things that get into your system well, you have something as an allergy or an attack, it's an immune system attack, where basically So I'm going to read through this kind of. So you have allergens that enter the body near the human mast cells. Here's the allergen that basically that body, whoever this is not able to process that without an allergic reaction. So B cells are alerted, and then they turn into the plasma cells, which release this particular immunoglobulin, okay, and I won't go into what that is, but ultimately you're going to have this histamine that's released that causes that inflammation, causes that, the rash typically. That's kind of a small dose of inflammation, but all those different, a lot of you guys might have allergies, all those different symptoms that come up with allergies. Sneezing, sometimes if you have a really bad allergy, you can't breathe and you go into what's called anaphylactic shock, and you have to have one of those EpiPens, which is epinephrine, that causes everything to kind of relax. So it can be very serious, but ultimately they can do a test to find out what you're allergic to, so that you can just either stay away from that. But also there's medications out there. It just depends on what you're allergic to and how severe it is. But again, this is an immune response to not being able to process kind of these allergens that enter your body. Autoimmune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis is one of the. This is a picture of that. One of the diseases that basically your immune system attacks your body's own cells and tissues. It's a huge bummer because there's typically not a lot you can do for these autoimmune diseases. Your body is just viewing your own body as kind of foreign, so it starts to attack. So there are different ways that people have found to kind of slow this reaction down, maybe to control some of the different immune responses. Basically it's just trying to figure out what triggers sometimes these immune system attacks, okay? But it's pretty devastating because basically your body's attacking your own body. All right, moving on. Immunodeficiency diseases. So this is something like HIV and AIDS, which AIDS obviously is the full-blown HIV virus, where your immune system is completely compromised. So results from the failure or absence of one or more parts of the immune system. Affected individuals are susceptible to diseases that would not bother most people. Genetic disorders, Hodgkin's disease, cancer, chemotherapy, radiation, all those can cause an immunodeficiency disease. So not just HIV, but basically these genetic disorders, when you undergo chemotherapy for cancer, basically chemotherapy is this harsh chemical that kills not only cancer cells, but healthy cells. So when you kill off a lot of your healthy cells, then obviously your immune system is kind of in this weak place. So you can get a disease that maybe most people could fight off. When you have HIV and it develops into AIDS, typically those people die from something like pneumonia, where most of us could fight that off. People that do not have that good immune system cannot fight that off, and ultimately they end up dying from something like that, okay? So of course there's, again, like I said, always something that may go wrong, whether it's with the immune system, the lymphatic system, or any of the other systems we've talked about. Things go wrong, and it's always kind of good to know what can happen. So that's it for the immune system and the lymphatic system. Join me soon for the next system. Haha, my favorite, the digestive. Okay, see you soon.